Hi, I'm Emma Roeder. I'm the one that emailed you earlier about sending you orcs footage. As you can see by the attachment that I sent, that footage is lost to the void of technology. So I threw myself a little pity party for about 20 minutes, and then I came onto campus so I could record my parts for you guys. I'm obviously not going to be able to do all of them, and I'm really sorry that I promised you guys footage that I don't have, but I'm going to record what I can for you and send you guys some footage of me doing this material because I promised you guys footage. So here we go. This is the direct examination of Tobin Johnson. I'm here with a teammate of mine who's going to be helping read out the answers, and I will proceed. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, I'm Tobin Johnson.
How are you involved in today's case, Ms. Johnson?
Well, I worked at Chuggies for a long time. I was a server and then a host and then a delivery driver. I really just kind of did it all until Chuggies burned down on July 31st. Of course, it's really just, it's so awful what happened to that poor firefighter.
Ms. Johnson, can you tell the court a little bit about your experiences when you first started working there?
Yeah, when I first started working at Chuggies, it was pretty much exactly what you'd imagine when you think of a college bar. A little gross, but really just a ton of fun. But when Dakota bought the bar in 2019, he came in and just seriously fixed the place up.
Well, what was it like to work for the defendant?
He came in with a ton of ideas. I mean, new theme nights, new policies. And eventually he came in and announced that he's actually going to be closing down the bar to really just fix up the whole place.
How did the defendant fix the place up?
He shut down the bar in November and around Thanksgiving and just really totally gutted the place out. New walls, new flooring, completely redid the bar counter. I mean, there were a bunch of new booths and we had these flat screen TVs all over the bar for game days. It was just really awesome.
Did the defendant tell the staff how he was able to pay for all these changes?
Yeah, Dakota told us about this loan that he'd taken out with the bank to pay for it. It was around $1 million, I think.
And how was business at Chuggies when you reopened from that $1 million renovation?
Not amazing. The bar was beautiful, but I mean, we just weren't seeing the crowds of college kids like we used to. And then the pandemic hit Midlands really hard and we were really just trying through it.
Well, let's actually talk about that for just a second. What was it like to work at Chuggies when the pandemic hit Midlands?
We started getting cases in March, and when the government shut down all the restaurants, Dakota fired pretty much all the staff except for himself and then me and the cook.
If there were only 3 staff members at Chuggies, did this affect your business at all?
We were struggling to get a couple of the delivery orders out at night, and it just kept getting worse and worse until Dakota pretty much stopped paying me altogether.
Did the defendant ever start paying you again while you were working at Chuggies?
I mean, no, not really. I went 3 months without a full paycheck. He wouldn't even really talk to me about the finances at all. Well, except for this one time in July when he called me into his office.
Ms. Johnson, when did this happen?
And this was July 15th.
Let's talk about that day. What specifically did you and the defendant speak about finance-wise on July 15th?
He told me that he needed help with the loan from the bank that he'd taken out to pay for all the renovations. He said he was trying to find some sort of extension. He showed me all the paperwork and I tried my best, but I mean, I just got my first debit card right before I left for college. So I'm not gonna lie, this just felt a little out of my league.
Well, was that all that you looked at when you were speaking with the defendant that day?
Yeah, we were drafting an email to the bank, and at the end of his desk, I saw this document with the 5-point mutual insurance at the top in just really big letters.
Would you recognize that document if I were to show it to you?
Yeah, I would.
I'm approaching the bench to retrieve what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 7B. And I'm approaching the witness with the same. Ms. Johnson, did you know what that document was when you first saw
No, I'd never seen it before, so I asked Dakota about it.
And what did the defendant say?
When I pointed it out, Dakota just laughed and made a joke about it being like the backup plan.
Ms. Johnson, did Dakota say what he meant by backup plan?
Well, when I asked Dakota, like, no, really, what is this? He told me that it was a fire insurance policy for the bar, that if a fire happened at the bar, they could collect all of the insurance money and rebuild.
Did you know how much that insurance policy was worth?
Dakota said that since the renovations were complete, it was worth $1.5 million. And obviously I wanted to follow up on that, but right then we had a delivery come in that Dakota wanted me to go sign for, so I had to drop it.
Well, okay, Ms. Johnson, I'm approaching the witness to retrieve what's been admitted as Exhibit 7B and return to the bench. Let's actually move to talk about the night of the fire. Ms. Johnson, were you working that night?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, then walk us through how your shift went.
We started as usual. I ran a couple of deliveries and I got a phone call from one of our customers that had been in the bar earlier that day, telling us that he had COVID. So we had to shut down for 2 weeks.
Did you tell the defendant about that call?
Yeah, I told him and it got a little tense, but we had to close up early. Dakota kicked out pretty much all the customers, and then me, Cook, and Dakota closed the place up really quick. And after we closed up, we were pretty much out of there at 7:45.
Ms. Johnson, were you there when the fire started on July 31st?
No, I wasn't.
Ms. Johnson, was there anybody still left at Chuggy's when you went home for the night?
I mean, when I was leaving, I still saw Dakota there.
Thank you. I have no further questions for this witness. I'm going to be doing the closing statement for the prosecution. This is a non-Weber prosecution case where we called Tobin Johnson, Kieran Singh, and Noor Khan. And the footage that I was going to send you in the round, the defense counsel brought Mel Jelani, Maddox Vaughn, and Alex Silva. So here we go. Opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. He was running out of time. We've talked a lot today about the days and weeks leading up to the fire at Chuggy's on August 1st. But there's one day, probably the most important day, that we actually haven't talked about yet. And that's August 2nd. You see, when you go back into deliberation, you're going to have Exhibit 1 with you. This is the medical examiner's report in this case. It says right here at the top that on August 2nd, 10:14 a.m., Jalen Williams was autopsied. This report will tell you that his skull was crushed under the debris of a collapsing ceiling, that his body was so badly burned they couldn't perform an internal examination. They couldn't even recognize him. Members of the jury, we're not just here today because the defendant decided to burn down his bar. We're here today because the defendant decided to burn down his bar, and Jalen Williams, a young man, a young firefighter, somebody who went into Chuggy's to save lives, lost his own. Jalen had his entire future ahead of him, and it was the defendant's choices that took that all away. He needs to be held accountable. That's why we, as the state, brought a charge of aggravated arson against the defendant. We needed to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt 3 things. First, that the defendant committed an act of arson with the intent to defraud. Second, that the defendant's action created a substantial risk of harm to emergency personnel. And third, that the defendant knew of these risks when he committed this act. Members of the jury, the harm is undeniable. Jalen should be here today. And the defendant, being a volunteer firefighter, somebody who knew exactly how dangerous those situations can be, well, he knew the risks when he set that fire. So let's take a step back. And let's talk about how we know what we know. How we know that the defendant is guilty of aggravated arson. Because this case doesn't actually start on August 1st. It starts back in 2019, when the defendant takes out a $1 million loan to renovate his bar, Chuggies. He wants to make his business the best that it can possibly be. And he closes for months to redo the entire interior, to make it something that he's proud of. But when business opens in January, it's not exactly what the defendant had hoped. The regulars aren't coming in like they used to. The college kids are still away, and he's taking losses. So much so that Chuggies employees have to take a pay cut in February just to sustain everything. But even that's not enough, because the defendant could have never predicted what would happen in March. When on March 23rd, all bars and restaurants in Midlands have to close for COVID safety regulations. Any chance that the defendant has to make up that missing money, well, that's gone out the window, and those bills start piling up. He misses a payment on that loan in April, and then again in May, and then again in June. And while all of this is happening, the defendant is doing exactly what he's supposed to. He's reaching out to the bank. He's saying, hey, we're struggling right now. We need help. We need more time. And the bank grants it again and again and again. Until on July 15th, when the defendant misses yet another payment, the bank finally says enough. On August 1st, the sum of all that missing money, nearly $20,000, well, that's going to be due. There's no more extensions. There's no more furloughs. You have no more time. The defendant is desperate. He knows he doesn't have that kind of money. He knows that on August 1st, when he misses that payment, he's going to lose everything. He's going to be left with nothing. Unless he uses the one thing that he does have. And so just 6 minutes later, he sends an email to his fire insurance agent just to make sure that that $1.5 million policy is still active, and it is. So what do desperate people do when they're put in a desperate situation? The defendant acted. So on July 17th, he goes into Harlow's Hardware and he purchases 6 cans of paint thinner that we know that the defense agrees accelerated the fire. And on July 31st, when he kicks everybody out of the bar, he pours that paint thinner across the bar floors. He lights that match, and the defendant thinks that he walks out rich. But he didn't plan on Kiran Singh. He didn't plan for Kiran Singh to see him throwing those cans into the back of his truck. He didn't plan for Kiran Singh to see him walking out the back doors, to see him as he's coming out and smell that smoke just 15 minutes later. He didn't plan on that 911 call coming in before he can get to the fire station. The fire station, where those firefighters are piling into that truck, where they're heading downtown. When they arrive on scene, who went into Chuggies to save those lives? Jalen Williams did. And when he was in there, when he was looking for people that needed to be saved, that ceiling collapsed and he was killed. Members of the jury, there can be no doubt. The defendant felt desperate. The defendant was running out of time to save his bar. The defendant chose to burn down Chuggies for its insurance payout, and the defendant's choices cost a man his life. Follow the evidence, follow your conscience, find him guilty of aggravated arson. Let him know that he's out of time. Thank you. This is my rebuttal. The 3 witnesses that were called were Noor Khan, Kiran Singh, Tobin Johnson on the prosecution, and Jelani, Alex Silva, Maddox Vaughn on the defense. The defense just came before you and said that we're telling you a story, that we're asking you to believe something so fantastical that it can't possibly be true. But ask yourself, have we really said anything that unreasonable today? Because it's perfectly reasonable that the person who is deeply in debt, the person who had a fire insurance policy that could make that all go away, the person who was spotted buying paint thinner that we know accelerated the fire, the person that was seen coming out of Chuggy's not once but twice on the night of July 31st, the person that was at the fire station just minutes after that 911 call came in saying that he sure hoped it wasn't Chuggy's, the person who, when he went into the building, when he went in to try to save Jalen Williams and Alex Silva, that person said, "I never meant for this to happen." It was all planned out. That person is responsible for Jalen Williams' death. That's reasonable. We know this to be true. Follow the evidence, follow what you know to be true. Find the defendant guilty of aggravated arson.